Hello and welcome to our video on creating an elastic TOML template. The main goal of this is to have a blank template that you can use whenever you want to start to create a new alert. This is really helpful because the alternative would be to just keep copying previously made alerts, which might not always fit the bill, and you'll have to be deleting a lot of text and potentially reworking the whole document. Whereas it's a lot easier to have a template where it's the lightest minimum spec version of the document that you can fill out for your new alert. Okay, to start, I have our required underscore fields TOML from when we went through the required fields section of the API documentation. And then we have here an alert for exporting Exchange mailbox via PowerShell. So what I'm going to do is make my own version of the template. I might be reworking it in a way that Elastic might not like. But to start, what we can do is get rid of the fields that we don't care about. So this whole metadata chunk we can get rid of. And looking at our rule here, this is our meat and potatoes section of the alert. If we look really quick here, we only have a small subset of fields that are actually required. And what we can do to make this a little bit more easier is getting rid of some of the notes here. And that consolidates this field. And then what we can do is start going from the top to bottom and reworking this. So first on our list, we have author. I'm actually inclined to keep this as a required field. I kind of like it. So I'm going to put my name in here. Description. This is a required field. What we want to do is blank it out. And if you want to emphasize the data type that is already in here, we can just say something like that. False positives, that's always something we could add in later. From, that's a nice field to actually keep. What from does is change the default look back time. By default, from is actually now -6 minutes. So in the case of this alert, they pushed it back to 9. I think that's pretty helpful to keep on here. For our lab, this might not be a factor because of how fast all the logging operates. But in a corporate environment, you might have some delays in logging, whereby a couple minutes delay might throw off this whole look back time completely. But to keep this easier to work with, I'm actually going to set this field as the default for Elastic. And I'm actually going to write a note in here to let the engineers know that this is the default value and that they can change it as need be. All right, indexes. So index we can get rid of if we want. By default, it'll use what's in the Elastic configuration. And what you can do if you go into stack management and scroll all the way down to security solution, you can see Elasticsearch indices. And there is a default index section here. And you can see the default indexes that Elastic gives us. For our lab environment, this is perfectly fine. Everything should be in one of these log categories, which is great. But just know that if you're in a corporate environment or you're using Elastic in a more comprehensive manner, that you can set this for your use case or make sure that you're requiring the index in your documentation. To make things simple, I'm just going to delete it. Going down in our list here, language, license, they can go. Name, that's needed. We're still going to blank it out. And then emphasizing that these are typically for analysts. So once they get the alert, that note and description will help them figure out what to do in their analysis. Okay, references, that's going to go. If you don't provide a hard-coded rule ID, Elastic will actually create one for you, which is really helpful. Severity, that's a required field. Tags is optional. I'm going to leave it in here just for ease of use. Timestamp override is optional, and type is required, as you can see here. And query is also required. The tables here for MITRE threat data, they're not required for the Elastic instance and importing the alert, but I actually want to make it required from the perspective that we want a MITRE attack tactic and technique to always be assigned to one of our alerts. And if you notice, they have multiple tactics and techniques in here. So in our example, they have the tactic here, and then they have a technique and sub-technique example right here. I'm going to get rid of this one. And there we go. And I'm just going to write a little note here that this is an example tactic, technique, and sub-technique, more of a reminder for the engineers that come behind you to fill this out with some new information. But it's okay to have this pre-populated. All right, comparing this to our original alert, this is a lot easier to digest at first glance. And what I'm going to do is rename this to elastic_template.toml. At this point, we have a really nice working example of how to have a neat template that you can base all your alerts off of. And it's helpful to emphasize that this could be a living document. For example, if you want no previous alert data to be in here, you can get rid of the query in here. You can get rid of the tactics and techniques in here. You can get rid of the example data in these fields, or you can add more. You can have a sample alert that has to be modified every single time you create an alert. Or let's say you want to have more options for fields that you may or may not remember. So for example, let's say the throttle field. If you want to have a mention of the throttle field in here without it being an active field, what you can do is add a section as a comment. So for example, down here, you could have something like optional fields. Maybe with some examples. And if you go down this route, you can have important optional fields that your department cares about without referring back to the official documentation every time you try to make an alert. And then let's say you're working through your template and you get to the end, you can make that decision on what fields you want in there, and you can simply delete the comment at the end. We're going to save this, and this is our template. Thanks for sticking with me. We're going to get into some Python in our next video. I hope you are ready for it because I know I am. I'll see you in the next one.